My fellow Americans, this was not a riot. This was a massacre. Among the worst in our history, but not the only one. And for too long, forgotten by our history. As soon as it happened, there was a clear effort to erase it from our memory, our collective memories, from the news and everyday conversations. For a long time, schools in Tulsa didn't even teach it, let alone schools elsewhere. And most people didn't realize that a century ago, the second Ku Klux Klan had been founded. The second Ku Klux Klan had been founded. A friend of mine, John Meacham, I'd written when I said I was running to restore the soul of America. He wrote a book called The Soul of America, not because of what I said. And there's a picture about page 160 in the book showing over 30,000 Ku Klux Klan members in full regalia, Reverend. Pointed hats, the robes, marching down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., Jesse, you know all about this. Washington, D.C. If my memory is correct, there were 37 members of the House of Representatives who were open members of the Klan. There were 5, if I'm not mistaken, could have been 7, I think it was 5, members of the United States Senate, open members of the Klan. Multiple governors were open members of the Klan. Most people didn't realize that a century ago the Klan was founded just 6 years before the horrific destruction here in Tulsa. And one of the reasons why it was founded was because of guys like me who are Catholic. It wasn't about African Americans then. It was about making sure that all those Polish and Irish and Italian and Eastern European Catholics who came to the United States after World War I would not pollute Christianity. The flames from those burning crosses torched every region of the country. Millions of white Americans belonged to the Klan, and they weren't even embarrassed by it. They were proud of it. And that hate became embedded systematically and systemically in our laws and our culture. We do ourselves no favors by pretending none of this ever happened, or it doesn't impact us today, because it does still impact us today. We can't just choose to learn what we want to know and not what we should know. We should know the good, the bad, everything. That's what great nations do. They come to terms with their dark sides. And we're a great nation. The only way to build a common ground is to truly repair and to rebuild. I come here to help fill the silence, because in silence, wounds deepen. And only, as painful as it is, only in remembrance do wounds heal. We just have to choose to remember. We memorialize what happened here in Tulsa, so it can't be erased. We know here, in this hallowed place, we simply can't bury pain and trauma forever. And at some point, there'll be a reckoning, an inflection point, like we're facing right now as a nation. What many people hadn't seen before or simply refused to see cannot be ignored any longer. You see it in so many places. There's greater recognition that for too long we've allowed a narrowed, cramped view of the promise of this nation to fester. The view that America is a zero-sum game where there's only one winner. If you succeed, I fail. If you get ahead, I fall behind. If you get a job, I lose mine. And maybe worst of all, if I hold you down, I lift myself up. Instead of, if you do well, we all do well. We see that in Greenwood. This story isn't about the loss of life, but a loss of living, of wealth and prosperity and possibilities that still reverberates today. Mother Fletcher talks about how she was the only able to attend school in the 4th grade and eventually found work in the shipyards as a domestic worker. Mr. Van Ellis has shared how even after enlisting and serving in World War II, he still came home to struggle with a segregated America. Imagine all those hotels and dinners and mom and pop shops that could have been passed down this past 100 years. Imagine what could have been done for black families in Greenwood. Financial security and generational wealth. If you come from backlines like my family, working class, middle class families, the only way we ever were able to generate any wealth was in equity in our homes. Imagine what they contributed then and what they could have contributed all these years. Imagine a thriving Greenwood in North Tulsa for the last 100 years, what that would have meant for all of Tulsa, including the white community. While the people of Greenwood rebuilt again in the years after the massacre, it didn't last. Eventually, neighborhoods were redlined on maps, locking black Tulsa out of home ownerships. A highway was built right through the heart of the community. Lisa, I was talking about our west side, what 95 did after we were occupied by the military, after Dr. King was murdered. The community, cutting off black families and businesses from jobs and opportunity. Chronic underinvestment from state and federal governments denied Greenwood even just a chance of rebuilding. We must find the courage to change the things we know we can change. That's what Vice President Harris and I are focused on, along with our entire administration, including our Housing and Urban Development Secretary, Marcia Fudge, who's here today. Because today we're announcing 2 expanded efforts targeted toward black wealth creation that will also help the entire community. The first is my administration has launched an aggressive effort to combat racial discrimination in housing. That includes everything from redlining to the cruel fact that a home owned by a black family is too often appraised at a lower value than a similar home owned by a white family. And I might add, and I need help if you have answered this one, I can't figure this one out, Congressman Horsford, but if you live in a black community and there's another one on the other side of the highway, it's a white community, it's built by the same builder, and you have a better driving record than the guy with the same car in the white community, you're getting paid more for your auto insurance. Shockingly, the percentage of black American homeownership is lower today in America than when the Fair Housing Act was passed more than 50 years ago. Lower today. That's wrong. And we're committed to changing that. Just imagine if instead of denying millions of Americans the ability to own their own home and build generational wealth, we made it possible for them to buy a home and build equity into that home and provide for their families. Second, small businesses are the engines of our economy and the glue of our communities. As president, my administration oversees hundreds of billions of dollars in federal contracts for everything from refurbishing decks of aircraft carriers to installing railings in federal buildings to professional services. We have a thing called I won't go into it all, but there's not enough time now, but I'm determined to use every taxpayer's dollar that is assigned to me to spend going to American companies and American workers to build American products. And as part of that, I'm going to increase the share of the dollars the federal government spends to small disadvantaged businesses, including black and brown small businesses. Right now it calls for 10%. I'm going to move that to 15% of every dollar spent will be spent with those. I have the authority to do that.